Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're really pleased to welcome you to the Oregon Historical Society. My name's Eliza Canty-Jones, and I work here as our editor of our journal, the Oregon Historical Quarterly, and as our director of community engagement, which generally means I get to do interesting things like this. So I do want to remind folks, if you've got a cell phone with you, if you can put it to silent, now's a good time for that. The restrooms are through these doors here, just through the exhibit and down the hallway. So please make yourselves comfortable. Oh, there's a cell phone now. I love it. We are recording this evening, and we're also streaming live on Facebook. So hello, Facebook. So keep that in mind. And then also we'll have a recording of this evening's program up on the Oregon Historical Society YouTube channel, where you can find a wealth of wonderful history presentations, and we'll also have it on a page on the OHS website, so you can direct your friends to this later. For those of you who don't know, the mission of the Oregon Historical Society is to preserve our state's history and to make it accessible to everyone in ways that advance knowledge and inspire curiosity about all of the peoples, places, and events that have shaped Oregon. And we do this work in a wide variety of ways. We've been around since 1898. We have a research collection that is unparalleled related to the history of the Oregon country, and it's open to the public 32 hours a week at no charge. So come on in to our research library during those open days and check out some Oregon history. You can research your house or your family or anything that you want to check out that we might have. We also have museum exhibits here on our downtown location on 3 floors. We travel some exhibits throughout the state. We have traveling trunks that go out to school groups and other organizations all across the state. We welcome school groups. We have online resources, the Oregon Encyclopedia and the Oregon History Project, where you can find digitized items and authoritative information about Oregon history. We have our journal, the Oregon Historical Quarterly, and we do public programs like this one. So please come check out all the work we're doing. Many of the programs that we have here at OHS are free and open to the public. So we'll have one coming up that I'm really excited about this Saturday from 3 to 5. The Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble is working with the Vanport Mosaic and the Maxville Heritage Interpretive Center to present a musical interpretation of the histories of Vanport and Maxville. And they're basically doing a tester for audience feedback on Saturday. So we'll have some folks who lived in Vanport and some folks who are working on the history of Maxville out in Eastern Oregon. It'll be from 3 to 5 here and should be really wonderful. And then the following weekend on October 8th, Dr. Kimberly Jensen and Joe Ogden are going to be presenting on the subject of race and resistance in early 20th century Oregon. So that'll be a wonderful presentation and discussion as well. So get on our mailing list, pick up an event flyer in the back, and come back and see us again. I do just want to make a quick note of thanks to all of the folks who support the Oregon Historical Society, our members of the Oregon Historical Society, our corporate and individual donors, the granting agencies, the state of Oregon, and also the good people of Multnomah County, who have now voted twice to enact a modest property tax levy that supports OHS and 4 historical societies in East Multnomah County. You folks who live in Multnomah County, we really appreciate this, and please take advantage of our thank yous, which include free admission to the museum and a discount on membership. So thanks so much, and take advantage of that. We really appreciate it. The work that we do really would not be able to be successful if we did not have strong community partners and folks who know to come to us as a resource. We are a toolbox in all kinds of ways, and one of the tools in that toolbox is this space that we can engage with our partners and with community members to talk about history, to reflect on important things that have happened in Oregon. So I just want to say thank you to all of you again for coming to us with this opportunity to host the program here. It really means a lot to us, so thank you. So I'm going to introduce 2 of our folks tonight, and then I will pass along the mic and we will get started. Here in the middle is Jan Musgrove-Elfers. Jan is the Executive Director of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, where she's worked for 13 years. She has served on the Board of Directors of the National Religious Campaign Against Torture Action Fund and the Commission to End Racism at the Episcopal Diocese of Oregon. She earned a bachelor's in psychology at Lewis and Clark College and completed a master's in theology at Marylhurst in 2006, where she focused on the role of interreligious dialogue in peacemaking. During her practicum experience at Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, she wrote a peace resource guide. In 2015, she completed a 2-year course of study at Father Richard Rohr's Living School for Action and Contemplation. I love the name of that, Action and Contemplation. To her left is Reverend Dr. Rodney Page, who holds Doctor of Divinity degrees from Texas Christian University and Northwest Christian College. He came to Portland in 1962 when he became Associate Minister at First Christian Church and Campus Minister at Portland State University. Go Vikings. In 1981, he became the Director of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, which initiated many significant programs under his direction. He was elected to the position of Executive Director of Church World Service in 1996 and participated in several international projects. Having retired in 2000, he currently serves as Chair of the Elders of First Christian Church and has taken a leadership role in Kiwanis. So please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Good evening. Can you hear me? I'd like to start by thanking the Oregon Historical Society for this invitation to come and talk tonight about the historical significance of these three gentlemen that surround me and their work with Middle East peace efforts. And so I'd like to start by introducing and welcoming Reverend Dr. Rodney Page to give us some opening comments about our topic tonight, and then we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, very much. I've known all three of these people for many years. I think Rabbi Stampfer the longest. I got to know Josh over glasses of wine and lunch together, but I really got to know him in Israel, in the West Bank, I remember, in Ramallah, when he and I got stoned together. What? We got rocks, stones thrown at us and a UN bus in Ramallah by a group of kids and busted out some of the windows. And I got to know Frank very well when at a big dinner to raise money for the Rodney Page Community Ministries Center, he got up and said, well, I didn't know Rodney Page very well. I wasn't much of a Muslim, but I went with him to Israel and the West Bank, and I was impressed by his spirituality, and I came home and became a devout Muslim. Now, I'm going to get to heaven, and St. Peter's going to say, how many people did you convert, Rodney? 1 to the Muslim faith. This is a story about our work together. And it began when I got a call from Ron Young, who wrote this book, Missed Opportunities for Peace in the Middle East. And Ron went and lived in the Middle East for a year with his family to do research for this book. And I'd known him for several years, and he called me and said, Rodney, I'm starting a national organization, the U.S. Interreligious Committee for Peace in the Middle East. I'm coming to Portland to give a talk, and I want you to put a group of people together of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. Well, I didn't know any Muslims. And I said, well, I'll try. And I got a group of Christians and Jews. We met at a Chinese restaurant at Southwest 18th and Jefferson. I thought an appropriate place for a group of Jews, Muslims, and Christians to meet. And Ron Young got up and talked about the organization he was putting together and these principles and a two-state solution for bringing peace in the Middle East. Well, Rabbi Rose was there, and he said, I can support that. I think it's right. Josh got up and said, I can't support that. I don't agree with some of those things. But I will be in Washington, D.C. When the organization is taking place of this U.S. Interreligious Committee, and I will drop in. Well, that was it. And I forgot all about it. Didn't think anything more until I got a call from Josh, who said, I want you to call together the clergy of Portland and anybody else. I've changed my mind. I was in a conversation with a Palestinian woman who confronted me with several things, and I want to talk about what I learned. And so I said, all right, we did. And I called the Oregonian, they put a thing in the paper about the meeting. I think, Frank, you came to that meeting. It was held at First United Methodist Church. And Rabbi got up and he told about this meeting with this Palestinian woman and how his mind had changed. Well, we decided then and there to call a meeting and start an organization called the Oregon Interreligious Committee for Peace in the Middle East, composed of Jews, Muslims, and Christians. And at that meeting was the U.S. Attorney, the former U.S. Attorney, Sid Lezak, who, by the way, served under 5 presidents, the only U.S. Attorney in the history of any state in the nation to serve under 5 presidents. And also Stuart Gates, the Vice President of Reed College. And whenever I said the Oregon Interreligious Committee of Peace in the Middle East, composed of Jews, Muslims, and Christians, they would in unison say, and others of goodwill. So I always had to tack that on. We decided one of the first things that we wanted to do was to take a group of Jews, Muslims, and Christians to Israel, Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza. And so we planned for it, and we did. And it was a wonderful occasion because then in that trip, by the way, Israel tried to stop that trip, but the name Stampfer is magical. Why? Because his grandfather was the chief rabbi of Jerusalem and started many of the cultural institutions that are still going on in Israel. So, of course, Israel had to let us come together. But I think we were one of the first groups of Jews, Muslims, and Christians ever to travel together throughout Israel. We met with members of the Knesset. We went to kibbutzes. We went to the West Bank and to Gaza. I don't think we could get into Gaza today, but we went all over talking to people, listening to the various sides, to some of the issues, the concerns, the problems that existed in the Middle East. We wanted to immerse ourselves. Well, the Oregonian heard we were going, so they sent a reporter and a photographer. I think it was Greg Noakes, yeah, and Randy Rasmussen, the photographer, and there was a television station, ABC from Eugene, Oregon, and we got a lot of press coverage. In fact, we got on the nightly news on NBC, not of our own doing, but because rocks were being thrown at us. But anyway, we had a wonderful experience of immersing ourselves into what some of the problems and the issues were. Well, time went on, and Iraq invaded Kuwait, and George Herbert Walker Bush decided to put together a coalition, I think they called it the Coalition of the Willing, to drive Iraq out of Kuwait. And so we decided to do something about it. Josh and I met, in fact, at another restaurant called the Piccolo Mundo. I don't even remember that, down by John's Landing. And I said, Josh, what can we do to demonstrate that Jews and Muslims and Christians can work and pray and serve together? And we came up with the idea of Cavalcade for Peace. What was the Cavalcade for Peace? We decided that on New Year's morning, just before the beginning of the Gulf War, we would invite the city of Portland to meet at the synagogue at Neve Shalom, and I would get up in this pulpit and I would offer a meditation and prayer. We'd sing a hymn together. Then we would say to all the Jews, Muslims, and Christians there, let's carpool together down to the mosque where Rabbi Stampfer spoke from that mosque. I think it was the first time a rabbi ever spoke from a mosque in this, not only this, probably the Northwest, Pacific Northwest. We all had to take our shoes off at the mosque, so we had every television station, plus the newspapers and everybody else, because this was a rare event because New Year's morning is a slow news day, friends, believe me. Anyway, they love filming all the rows of shoes that were outside the mosque. Then we got back in our cars, came down to First Christian Church, where the imam spoke. First time that an imam ever spoke from the pulpit of First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And then I had everybody get in a giant circle. We sang the hymn, "Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me." And Stuart Gates came up to me with tears, former ambassador to Morocco, tears streaming down his cheeks, saying, "You know how to make an old man cry." Well, this was I'm just giving you a snippet. I could go on, and people are giving me the high sign all over. So I'm going to wrap this up. But I wanted to give you a little taste of our background, our history, what we went through. Rabbi Stampfer changed his mind. I changed my mind. And oftentimes when you change your mind, friends dislike you. And even the people you change your mind to, they don't like you either still. But I think that politics is where conscience and power meet. Frank, Josh, we're not afraid to engage in politics. And if we see ourselves as participants in God's redemptive work, we will enter the political fray with energy and passion. If we remember that in the light of God, the nations are but a drop in the bucket, we will resist the temptation to gloat about our victories or despair of our defeats. We will see that unquestioning loyalty to one party, ideology, or person for what it is, a form of idolatry. Only God possesses the truth. The world is a complicated and broken place, and we are complicit in its brokenness. Only when we come to terms with our complicity can we begin the difficult yet spiritually edifying task of working towards justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. It's always interesting to look at history and see how very relevant historical events are to the day and the time we live in now. So although we're looking back, I think we can see so many relevant issues that we are faced with today and learn from our past, from these three gentlemen. I'd like to now introduce Frank Afranji and Rabbi Joshua Stampfer. First, Frank, to my right, was born and raised in Ramallah, Palestine. He received his BS and MS engineering degrees in Illinois and his MBA from Portland State University. Mr. Afranji has long been active in the area of Middle East peace and Israeli-Palestinian dialogue. He has served on the board of the Interreligious Committee for Peace in the Middle East, is a board member of the City of Portland's Harmony Commission, and as advisor to the Oregon chapter of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. And next, Rabbi Joshua Stampfer was born in Jerusalem, Israel, and moved with his family to the United States as a young child. His father served as a rabbi in many U.S. cities. Joshua Stampfer graduated from the University of Chicago, received his MS from the University of Akron, his MHL from the Jewish Theological Seminary, and his DHL from the University of Judaism. He received an honorary doctorate from Pacific University in 1987. He served Congregation Neve Shalom in Portland, Oregon from 1953 to 1993, and is currently the Rabbi Emeritus there. Now I'd like to ask Frank and then Rabbi Stampfer to make some opening comments, and then I will be posing several questions to the panelists, and after that, I'll open the floor up for questions from the audience. I'd first like to start with Frank.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Jan, and thanks for the Oregon Historical Society for arranging this get-together again. It's like a reunion. It's more like a reunion of a high school, but it's way beyond high school for us. The truth of the matter is, Rodney spoke of being stoned in Ramallah, and that was really bad, meaning back then, rocks would be thrown at buses in a form of resistance of the occupation. And it was really bad back then. When we visited, kids were being shot. They were quadriplegics and paraplegics and lost eyes and what have you. The situation was horrible. And we thought things couldn't be getting any worse than it was. But I can assure you today, unfortunately, 30 years on, things are really worse. But I leave that today for probably the questions and answers periods. I will try to remember the process by which we got together again, just reiterate that. Speaking on at the end of this talk, I'm going to present to the Oregon Historical Society a documentary on this trip and interviews that followed that trip that was second runner-up for the best documentary in the U.S., the Edward R. Murrow, or F. Murrow, I can't remember, award in that year. And it was compiled by the ABC crew, and it received high acclaims. Hopefully the Oregon Historical Society can use that, because in that video, that documentary, a lot of the Oregon luminaries are in this. Sid Lisak, Stu Gates, Dr. Nahat Tolan, who's the School of Business about 10 feet away from here, is named after him, who tragically passed away a few years ago in a car accident. And he was born in Egypt, and he was a member of this organization. One of the founding. So we had many, many Oregon luminaries, if you will, who were part of that organization. Mr. Meyer, who was the head of the ACLU here, and on and on and on. I think what's significant, at the time we did this, at the time we got together, it wasn't stylish for Arabs and Jews, for Palestinians and Israelis to be talking with each other. It was very difficult. And when you hear Rodney speak of NBC, National News, catching us over there, actually part of what was caught at the time, the Palestinians and Israelis, as I said, were not talking at all with each other. They were not speaking at all with each other. We met that morning with a Palestinian leader who just was released from Israeli jails. His name is Faisal Husseini, who was the head of the Jerusalem Palestinian population. And we asked him, are you negotiating with the Israelis? No. We were in the Knesset. Are you talking with the Palestinian leadership? No. And we were sitting, having dinner at the Notre Dame Hotel in Jerusalem, which is located exactly between East and West Jerusalem. It was almost like a no-man zone in Jerusalem. So we're sitting there having dinner, and within a few minutes, Mr. Husseini goes in a side room, and we didn't think much of it. The man is entitled to go have dinner. A few minutes later, an Israeli minister walks in that same room. So they were the beginning of Palestinian-Israeli discussions. And Greg Knox, who was, many of you may know, who was with the Oregonian, was also an Associated Press stringer. So he gets on the phone, and those poor guys who thought they were talking in secret, within minutes, they walk out of the room, and there is about 10 TV cameras, dozens of reporters, and that's how we ended on the national news, because it was breaking news then. It wasn't stylish for Palestinians and Israelis to be speaking with each other. Now, I want to go back to how did I connect with Rabbi Stampfer. When I read in the paper that he came back from DC, and I go, wow. So I get on the phone and dial up his phone number, and I say, he didn't know me, I didn't know him. I know of him, and I said, Rabbi, I just want to congratulate you and applaud you for, taking such a progressive stand and willing to stand for human rights and what's right. And he goes, you don't have to do that. What I want you to do is come meet with me. We're having this meeting. This is how you contribute, not by giving me a call. That's how we met. And so I met with Rabbi Stampfer and Reverend Page, and that was the beginning of really the Oregon Interreligious Committee for Peace. And as you heard, and we had many activities that the essence of those activities was to break the ice between Palestinians and Israelis, between Jews and Arabs. One of the first issues we did was in the first Christians, in the basement here, in the first Christian church, we invited the artwork of 14 Palestinian artists and 14 Israeli artists, Jewish artists. And we had that exhibit at the basement. And what we agreed during that discussion, there will be no politics. We just wanted people to get to know each other and talk with each other. We asked Governor Atiyah at the time, who many of you may know, of a Syrian Lebanese background. We asked him to join and open up the discussion. And he came in, and that was the beginning of a lot of Jewish, Arab, American interactions and people of goodwill. And we really, during that period, that group had a tremendous impact on the communities and the thinking and the working together for peace in Oregon. Sadly, I have to say, since those days and since the group disbanded after the Oslo Accords in 1993, we figured peace broke out, hallelujah, we're moving on, let's do our own things. What happened since then, regrettably, the extreme conservatives took over, and I'm seeing a lot of regression in the work for peace and in the cooperation between the communities, some of it. But the seeds that we planted are there, and I'll end by saying, not too long ago, we have a group here, an entity here called the Muslim Educational Trust. They have a very new, nice community building. And I got invited to a dinner. And lo and behold, there was a higher number of Jewish Americans bringing food to and engaging with Muslim Americans in that building than I've ever seen in my life. So the seeds were there. Yes, the politics has regressed, but I think the seed of cooperation continues. And I'll stop here and pass it on to Rabbi Stampfer.
Well, I'll try to use my own microphone. I think so much has already been said that makes it very clear that the role that the Interreligious Committee on Peace in the Middle East has been a significant element in Oregon history. I first came out to Oregon in 1953. Graduate of the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City. So many of my friends at that time said, Josh, do you know what a mistake you're making going out to Oregon? I said, what do you mean? Oregon is off the map. It's a little island on the West Coast. If you really want to be involved in the world events, in the Jewish world events, if you're going to go to the West Coast, go to Los Angeles. Well, I persisted in coming to Oregon. You know why I came to Oregon, actually? I came in February. And I left Lincoln, Nebraska in February, covered with ice and cold. And I came to Portland, and lo and behold, there were such beautiful flowers growing in the garden right by the synagogue that I brought home a bouquet of flowers taken from the garden of the synagogue and showed it to my wife, Goldie, and said, Goldie, this is where we're going. And she agreed. And it was the best step that I took in my life. It's already 64 years that I'm in Portland and have enjoyed every moment of it. But as Rodney pointed out in his eloquent introduction to our evening, for me, this organization marked a fundamental change in my life and in my soul. I was born in Jerusalem. In 1929, when I was 8 years old, I made my first trip back to Israel. I came here when I was 2. That summer of 1929 was the first major outburst of violence in Israel that took place in the city of Hebron, south of Jerusalem. A pogrom occurred there on one day, and the entire Jewish community of Hebron was wiped out by murderous assassins. Among them was a large segment of my own family. You can imagine how an 8-year-old would react to all of the pain and agony that surrounded the family at that time. I was convinced that we were engaged in a mortal battle with the Arab world, and committed myself to doing whatever is in my power to support the efforts of the Jewish community of Palestine to remain alive and to thrive. I didn't go back to Palestine for many years until I was a student at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Graduated already from college, and I took a year off to study at the Hebrew University for 1 year. That was 1947. By then, World War II had been fought. Tremendous changes in the Middle East had taken place. And one day, on campus, I was approached by a fellow student who asked me if I would be interested in joining the Haganah. I responded with enthusiasm, yes, and went through the process of being enrolled into the Haganah. What I've seen on television screens really happened to me. I was blindfolded, driven to an apartment building in Jerusalem, brought into a room. My blindfold was removed, and there was a bare table, and on the table, indeed, there was a pistol and a Bible. And I was asked to put my hand on the Bible and to take an oath of allegiance to dedicate myself to the defense of the Jewish community of Israel as a member of the Haganah. And I went through all of the Haganah training that they could provide for me. Again, I emphasize what my state of mind was. Here was a people, my people, who had lived in exile for 2,000 years, were beginning to come back in small numbers to the land of Israel, particularly after the Holocaust had taken away 1/3 of all the Jews of the world. And then I came to, after I graduated the seminary, I came to Portland and was very well received here because the way I felt about Israel was the way practically all Jews in Portland felt about Israel. And then along comes Rodney Page and upsets my life. Very innocently it sounded. Josh, it's going to be a meeting, and they want to talk about peace in the Middle East. Would you be willing to come down to the meeting? At that time, I was still driving. I said, sure, I'll be glad to do that. And I came there, and I heard the presentation, just as Rodney has said, and I honestly would not have been very much moved, no matter how eloquent Ron Young was. Unfortunately, I've heard too many eloquent speakers who failed to move me. But when he said that the meeting would be in Washington, D.C., where my daughter lived, and I hadn't seen her for a long time, I said, I volunteer to go under my breath to see my daughter. But lo and behold, when I committed myself to going, I found myself talking not just to a Palestinian woman, but to a large number of Palestinians, and listened to their story. And all of a sudden, it dawned on me. They have an equally tragic story. My story is tragic, but theirs is equally tragic. And I have to listen carefully. And I did. And was determined after that that we have to learn each other's story and absorb it and understand it and do what we both can to make this a better world, namely a more peaceful world. The next Friday night, I spoke to my congregation about it. I could see their faces. They thought I was in need of psychiatric care. But I went on. Most of them listened carefully and sympathetically, and we were off on this journey. And as Rodney pointed out, it's been a journey of many activities, many programs, many efforts to bring this kind of understanding to the larger community. I want to say one thing about Oregon and then stop. Oregon has a remarkable history. It has a history of great bigotry and a history of great tolerance and understanding. That's the nature of our state. We're very proud of the role that we have played in so many areas of American life. And I had the hope that even here in this little edge of the United States, we can help play a role in changing the whole country. There are a lot of bumps along the way. I have to be perfectly honest with you. One of the biggest bumps that I have met along the way, I'm still reeling from that bump. And that's the program of President Trump, who is so divisive and has made it so difficult to do precisely what we want to do, to bring people together, to understand each other's pain rather than to add to that pain. But we shall overcome.
Amen.
And we are going to dedicate ourselves to that goal.
I just should say, thank you, Rabbi. That was wonderful. You should know that one night his little group was to go out on patrol when he was in Haganah. And Josh had a bad cold, and the commander said, "You keep back." That night, his whole patrol was wiped out. He was the only survivor. Yeah. I just want to say about Jan Elferson, because you brought up Trump, and today he announced there's a cap at only 40,000 refugees, where we have been taking 150,000 refugees in. And Ecumenical Ministries operates SOAR, Sponsors Organized to Assist Refugees. They brought in more refugees than any other organization in the state of Oregon. So Jan is in a very difficult position tonight because of what the president has done in capping off the number. I just had to throw, I'm sorry, I had to throw that in.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing your stories. And I'd like to now start with a question, and I think I'll ask Rabbi Stampfer to start and make comments, and then we'll go to Frank and to Rodney. What do you think you have accomplished in all of these years working on this issue?
Good question. What do we?
You know, there are, in this whole area of life, there are no quantity measures that can be drawn. We can't talk about weight or length or size or anything. I've already alluded to some things. And let me particularly talk about one. Rodney already indicated when we started, he used the term, it wasn't fashionable. It was stronger than not fashionable. I had the dubious pleasure of being publicly called by the Israeli embassy in San Francisco a traitor to Israel. It was in newspapers publicly announced. So it wasn't just unfashionable. What has happened now is that there has emerged in the United States an organization that you all should know about at least, and that's called J Street. J Street is an organization of American Jews who profoundly believe in a two-state solution, who profoundly believe that we ought to work together with people of like minds to really bring about peace in the Middle East. And J Street today is one of the strongest Jewish organizations in America. I honestly believe that Little Oregon played a significant role in encouraging J Street to undertake the kind of program that they have.
Along the same line, when Rabbi Stampfer retired, Rabbi Isaac took his place. He was brand new to Oregon, brand new to the synagogue of Neve Shalom, and just about few weeks after he started his job, a Jewish terrorist went into a mosque in Hebron and killed 29 worshippers, shot them down and killed them. Rabbi Isaac turned to his assistant and said, you know, I really would like to get in touch with somebody from the Islamic community and the Palestinian community to see if there's something we could do. But probably there is no chance you guys would know anybody from that. She goes, oh, here's the list. Here's the list of all the people. Here are their phone numbers. Here's what we've been doing with them. And he was stunned because where he came from, I can't remember which state he came from, there was no such thing between Palestinians and between Jews, Christians, and Muslims working together for peace. Small achievement, but an achievement. I have to say, when you have the registered guard newspaper in Salem, and there was a paper from Salem, paper from Eugene, and of course the Oregonian. For weeks on end, they had continually wrote articles about the efforts of the group. That changed the minds of many, many people in Oregon. Those folks became ambassadors to move elsewhere to create the type of dialogue and the type of cooperation. We started what was called the Cousins Club, Arabs and Jews discussing issues among themselves. And let me say, it was like going on a wonderful journey, because there was a lady here in town, her name is Susan Abravanel, and her husband, Alan Abravanel. And Susan was very opposed to what we were doing. Then she joined the group. I would sit with Susan and say, oh, we have this religious holiday called Ashura, and this is what it celebrates. And she goes, oh, this is exactly a Jewish holiday. We celebrate the same thing. So it was a journey of discovery among us all. Now, when we traveled to Palestine and Israel, there was seeds of 63 different organizations that were working for peace. Now, as Rabbi Stampfer said, that was back there. There was hardly anything back here. Now, aside from J Street, which is a very important organization, you have even groups who are even more progressive, like the Jewish Voices for Peace. Very strong, very determined, working hand in hand with their counterparts to work for peace. Yes, by the way, after we had our Cousins dialogue group here, which cascaded into several dialogue groups here, we started hearing of same type of Arab-Jewish dialogue groups in LA and San Francisco and Philadelphia and what have you. So I can't say we can take all the credit for this, but when people hear about one group, they would say, why not us? And back then, we really did have local as well as regional as well as national coverage. And I have to believe in some small way it encouraged others to do the same.
Very quickly, I'll just say there's all kinds of dialogue now going on between Christians and Jews and Muslims that didn't exist before. Rod Reeves is here in the second row there, and he's a part of the Oregon dialogue, interfaith dialogue. There's a unit within Ecumenical Ministries. Jan sits on interfaith dialogue. There's a Muslim Educational Trust. In fact, Ecumenical Ministries just not too long ago honored Waji Saeed, who is the head of the Muslim Educational Trust, for all of his work of promoting. So there's all kinds of this dialogue going on that wasn't going on. When Ron Young called me to put together a group of Jews, Muslims, I didn't even know a Muslim to invite. And I tried to reach out, but wasn't successful. But I'm just saying that because of this, all kinds of fruit has come to bear of Jews, Muslims, and Christians working, praying, and serving together, and others of goodwill.
Thank you. All right, I'd like to start with Frank this time. I understand that the permanent members of the Oregon Interreligious Committee for Peace in the Middle East negotiated principles to guide your peace work. Can you elaborate on how you came to those principles? You might want to state some of those.
Absolutely. You know, back then, absolutely, it wasn't stylish to talk about anything called two-state solution or the end of the conflict or what have you. What's really funny today when I read those principles to you, it's kind of like you would say, so what's new? Why are you wasting our time? But those principles back then truly were groundbreaking principles. And I would say, I would start with at least one of them. Principle number 2 was 2 states. The only reasonable and practical resolution to the conflict is 2 viable and sovereign states for the 2 independent and free peoples, to enable each state to reflect the unique culture and aspiration of its people, ensure that Israel remains a predominantly Jewish state, and Palestine remains a predominantly, an Arab state. We discussed borders. We discussed Jerusalem being a united city with two, basically the capital of two states, open borders. We did not believe in closed borders. We wanted the borders open between those two cousins, if you will, those two people. We even negotiated the Temple Mount, Haram al-Sharif, which is the most contentious area, religious area in Jerusalem. It took a lot of negotiations with a lot of people from around the table. As I said, there was a lot of Oregonians who were part of the discussion, religious people, political people, and it was painstakingly negotiated. Almost every word, every sentence, every comma was negotiated. But at the end of the day, we were all in agreement that those two populations should live in peace next to each other in their own, within their own culture, within their own political identity. Yet, we believe that the whole country, Israel and Palestine, is the mother of both nations, and it should have open economic borders. In my view, that solution should remain, and in my view, until today, it's the only viable solution, even though what's happening right now with the government that is in there right now, it's slowly destroying the possibility of such a solution. But that's where we were back then.
Well, it's time to have a little disagreement. Whenever I sit with Frank on the platform, that's what happens. In principle, I certainly adhere to the notion of a two-state solution as being the best answer. However, I am very sorry to say I have come personally to the conclusion that that is not going to happen. And it's not because of one side or the other, but it's because of both sides. Extremism has taken the dominant role both among Israelis and among Palestinians. Among Israelis, the ultra-Orthodox have become an growing political power in the country. And what they have done, and that's the whole point of ultra-Orthodoxy, is that they are expressing the will of God, which is not open to compromise. They believe that God expressed his will in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible. And in the Hebrew Bible, some of the most sacred sites religiously of the Jewish people are in the West Bank. And they have initiated the growth of settlements to such a point that today, nobody knows exactly how many, but the talk now is about 400,000 settlers. There's no way in the world, in my mind, that they are going to remove 400,000 settlers. And there's no way, in my mind, that a Palestinian state can be created with 400,000 Israeli settlers. So that's on one side. On the other side, the Palestinians themselves are no longer ready to make peace with Israel. They keep talking about Abbas. He's not the leader of the Palestinians. When they had a vote among Palestinians, his party, the Fatah, fell far below Hamas. Most of the Palestinians are identified today with Hamas. Hamas is not willing today, and publicly will say so, to agree to compromise 1 square foot of Palestine. I can't see any possibility of a two-state solution as long as those conditions continue. We also now have ISIS, which didn't exist before. ISIS is calling for a religious Muslim state for the Middle East. ISIS is at war with Muslim states. The chance, for example, I would have said, if Yasser Arafat was still the leader of the Palestinian state, we would have had a much better chance of having a two-state solution. But when Ehud Barak at Camp David was willing to hand over 95% of the West Bank, it was turned down. The situation in terms of extremism is even greater today than even at that moment. So I'm very pessimistic about any possibility of a two-state solution.
Well, I'm going to give you a little optimism, Josh, because I think an Oregonian may bring salvation to Israel. And I'm talking about Lee, the founder of Hand in Hand, Lee Gordon. He went to Israel, went in the army, came out of the army and said, I want my life to count for something. He hooked up with a Palestinian. He founded a school called Hand in Hand. And it goes through all the grades. All of us have visited it. Each grade is team taught by an Israeli and a Palestinian. And it's taught both in Arabic and Hebrew. And from that one school that they had in Jerusalem, there's now 5 schools. And it's won all kinds of awards from the Ministry of Education of Israel. That is the future of going into those grades and seeing those kids, Jews and Arabs and Jews, Muslims, and Christians, all in the same classroom, learning together, appreciating one another, respecting one another, listening to one another. That's the future. So this Oregonian, Lee Gordon, may bring salvation to Israel.
If I may, as you could tell, friends do disagree. Now, I may not have as big of a disagreement with you as you think. I chose my words carefully. I said, the perfect solution, what I really would like to see, and I believe in, is the two-state solution. Sure. I have to say that based on the present government of Israel and makeup of that government, it destroyed every speck of possibility of such a state. So now I think we're going to go back to when the Palestinian movement started in 1965. And their slogan was, one country, one person, one vote. Call it Palestine, call it Israel, call it Mau Mau, but one country, one vote for its inhabitants. And I think President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president, only last week at the United Nations for the first time in his life said, it seems like the two-state solution is not going to happen, so we will demand our rights as residents of that piece of land to become citizens of one country with equal rights, with equal representation. And that's an anathema for the right, the extremists within Israel, because they say we want a Jewish state where the Jewish state is a majority. You can't have it both ways. You can't have peace and keep a population in bondage within an area, not allowing them to be free and not allowing them to be equal citizens. You cannot have it both ways. At this stage, I believe, and unfortunately I do agree with you on our setup here in the United States, that we're blindly, our current administration is blindly supporting the situation. The current US ambassador to Israel was speaking 2 weeks ago, and he said the alleged occupation of the West Bank. He doesn't even recognize that it's an occupation. That makes me really sad. And I think ultimately, unless we can separate, we have to have our equal rights, our equal citizenship, our equal right to vote in the government and army, and defend that country as equal citizens of that land.
I had one more question, but I think since we're running a little late, there might be some questions of the audience members. So I think I would like to ask now, if any of you have a question that you would like to ask of the panelists, I'd ask that you ask a question and not make a statement. These are our speakers up here. So, but I welcome any of your questions for any of the panelists now.
Hello, I'm Bill Jacobs. I appreciate seeing the idea that you at one time saw a two-state solution and are thinking at the moment that a one-state solution, this is a change of perspective in the midst of history. And I'm sure that children who are working together will at some point find a third answer. But I wonder about the idea of two states reinforcing territorial thinking, nationalist thinking. We see a lot of nationalism, not just Trumpism, but nationalism with the Kurds, nationalism in Europe, and other things resurgent. And the idea of two states sounds to me like we are allowing national borders to define the possibilities for peace. And I'm wondering if you can just comment on whether nationalism hurts chances for peace, territorialism hurts chances for peace, or whether it enhances peace, please.
I'll try to be very brief, but my Bible is a song by the Beatles, Imagine. And the truth of the matter is, I wish that people start recognizing that rabid nationalism and exclusivism is going to be destructive, and it's going to lead us to where we try to avoid another Third World War sometime. I think I see it happening in Europe. I see it happening in the Middle East. I see it happening in this country. When I came to this country in 1972, at least maybe I was in a college campus where people were a bit more progressive. But the country recently that I came into has changed drastically within the last 10 years. I see nationalism is blinding us to the needs of the world. The U.S., I have to say, historically, and I believe it still is the beacon among the nations. And I hope we stay that way. We used to send people to help people read and eat and plant, and now we are the biggest exporter of arms. And I wish we could reverse that and go back and reduce nationalism, and remember that we're all, I mean, that sounds like I'm preaching, but this is truly how I believe. We'll be much better off if we start respecting our other human beings across a fake line somewhere on a map. But I'll leave here.
Well, I think nationalism is the bane of human existence. That unfortunately we have a president now who thinks nationalism is the salvation of humanity and of America. It's an unfortunate, in my estimation. I just wanted to ask the audience a question, because Rabbi said something I thought was most interesting, where he said, Oregon is both one of the most inviting, hospitable, diverse states, and yet has great bigotry in it. Did you know what station, what nation, what state in the nation has the highest incidence of hate crime of any state in the nation? Oregon. Oregon, per capita, has the highest incidence of hate crime of any state in the nation. Statistics supplied by the Southern Poverty Law Institute. Any other questions?
Do you think sending missionaries over would help bringing them to peace?
Well, I think missionaries would help very much if they brought a message of reconciliation, of a hope, of generosity, of compassion. That kind of message is what contemporary missionaries need to bring, of people working together and celebrating diversity in our midst.
I just want to add very quickly, there is missionaries and there is missionaries. You know, I'm the product of Quaker missionaries that moved into my hometown in 1869. And the Quakers have been major contributors to peace and mediation and getting people together. But then you get other missionaries who sow the seeds of my life is the best, my God is the best, and by the way, that his God is not as good as my God, and they may sow division instead of unity. So there is missionaries and there is missionaries.
All I'd like to say on that score is that in the Middle East, I don't believe that religion is the solution. Religion is the problem.
Any other questions?
I would say religion is the problem, but it's really people using religion to try to wield power and over people. But I think the basic message of Judaism and Christianity and the Muslim religion is really one of compassion and kindness and generosity. And that should be the main message of all religion. but unfortunately it's subverted by people who want to use religion.
Well, religion, there's no such thing as religion. There are what people believe is their religion. I mean, take the Muslims themselves. You can quote the Quran and find all kinds of beautiful passages about peace. But you can also do the same thing in the Quran and find terrible passages about war. You can do the same thing in the Bible. Yep. So religion is what, as you say, religion is what people interpret and understand. It doesn't, there's no person named religion preaching. There are people preaching religion.
You know, just very quickly, as I was looking for this tape, I ran across something on YouTube, which basically it was the three of us speaking at the City Club. And one of the statements I had in the City Club is exactly along the same lines, is you can go into the holy books and find what divides us. I choose to go into the holy books and find what unites us. And there is so much that unites us. As I told you, I grew up in a Quaker school, which was about 50% Muslim, 50% Christian. Every morning in chapel, we had a Muslim student stand up and read a passage, and a Christian student stand up and read a similar passage from the Quran and the Bible. I used to hate it quite a bit because we had that chapel every morning for 20 minutes, but looking back at it, it's probably the best thing that was done to that community, because now across the world, we have Christian and Muslim ambassadors who love each other, who work with each other, who grew up with each other, and understand the beauty of each other's religion.
Is there one last question before we close tonight? Yes.
I think I agree with the rabbi that a two-state solution will be more challenging with 400,000 settlers, but I guess I find it ironic that Israel would say, well, we can't support a two-state solution because we have 400,000 illegal settlers out there. I mean, it seems like a bad defense, you know, to the two-state solution, because they've allowed this, you know, huge influx of settlers. And again, that's an observation. I'm interested in hearing what anybody thinks about that.
More of an observation.
Oh, so I don't have to answer? There's time to do an observation.
Okay, we'll let Tom have it.
Okay, the last
Tom Sagas here will have the last question.
I'm encouraged by the hand-in-hand solution. We saw a film festival movie where an Israeli had a solar system that he wanted to expand in Palestine because of the control of the energy that's going on there. And he found a partner, and they wanted to set up a business. They were excited about it, but their families wouldn't let them do it. But hand in hand is a seed. And but the Hamas families won't let their kids go there.
Well, it isn't operating in the Gaza Strip. It's not there, of course, but it is in various places. They now have 5, and they're expanding to more. And in addition to the hand-in-hand, there is shalom, salam, Neve Shalom. It's called Neve Shalom. It's a little village, actually, of Jews and Arabs living together. And they They live together, they go to school together, and it's really a model. And it was started by a Catholic priest, I believe, wasn't it? Yeah. And it's expanding. Josh and I, and you two have, yeah, we've all visited and we're really taken by it. So there are these experiments. There are these ways that people, diverse people, are working, living, learning together. And that's, I think, going to be ultimately the salvation of the country. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Frank, would,
Again, I just want to present this to you. I hope it can be useful. It could archive the history of many people who are not with us any longer, unfortunately, and some of us that are still here, thank goodness. So I'm hoping you can put it to good use with the Oregon Historical Society. And thank you very much for attending.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Rarely have we had such a distinguished panel who has done so much for Oregon and the world. So thank you all very much. And thank you all for being here this evening. Have a good night.